Are you muted, Jules?
Hello there, and welcome to Autistic Radio on Sunday in our regular slot, 5:55 p.m. Shortly we'll be joining Harry with the Spectrum Voices programme. Harry brings together different ideas that are available out on Facebook into a safe curated page, autisticradio.com, where you will find the content more comfortable and less challenging than the general sense of social media out there. And we will take inspiration from that and discuss it amongst us as a group of very different autistic people. Every Sunday we also have an open meeting where, instead of doing everything behind closed doors, we invite you, the listener, to hear what we're thinking. I'll bring up one subject, and that is the types of support that's offered to autistic people to get into employment. Autistic Radio and Autistic Association also have a small manufacturing company. We have thought it's time to offer autistic people the opportunity to get involved in that as well as Autistic Radio. And coincidentally, we were contacted by our local authority here in Scotland suggesting that under a special scheme we might have somebody come and join us and work as an intern. I'm a little bit concerned about that because the intern won't be paid, and whilst I do understand that we will be putting a lot of work in to give somebody the opportunity to take maybe their first steps into the world of work, it doesn't feel right to me that they will be doing work that could possibly be paid work that another autistic person could take on. So I want to ask the group what they think generally about pursuing this opportunity with our local authority.
If it's an internship, it should be paid. I understand volunteering opportunities because I get involved in a lot of volunteer work myself, but it's also concerning the type of work that the intern would be asked to do without getting paid. Doesn't seem fair. It seems like cheap labour, for want of a better term, and that doesn't fill me with confidence.
In the chat, Raymond has put a fair pay for a fair day's work. Am I to say that we shouldn't take part in this because it's not paid? Or am I to try and go back to the authority and say we at least want to pay the person a fair wage for somebody who is learning a job?
Yeah, check if they're flexible.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the internship that I've done in the past, it was permitted work and it allowed like 15 hours of payment sort of thing, and that sort of, it was like in between. If you're on benefits, etc., you get financial support elsewhere. It gives you a way in, and a more comfortable way in than it would if it was just totally voluntary, because it just seems it just leaves people vulnerable, I think. And it just feels a bit cheeky, in fairness. So to go back to the table and suggest flexibility wouldn't be a bad step forward. And if they respond, and just to see how they respond to that.
Okay, thanks everybody. I've just broached a subject with you, and obviously we'll have more discussions. Somebody here says that in Canada, for unpaid internships, the employers must derive little or no benefit for the work, which is an interesting concept because here in the UK, the minimum wage is not enforced if somebody is in an educational environment. And I'm concerned that the balance isn't correct. And I think that's what we're taking back for this from this meeting. So we'll look into it. And if anybody out there wants to comment on this, please tell us. So now, Harry, let's have the main event of today. Spectrum Voices, over to you.
Thanks, Jules. Hello, everyone. This is Harry's Facebook for Sunday, the 31st of August 2025. And this is where we discuss Facebook posts that have been shared on the Autistic Radio page and the topics that are based within them. So the first post for this evening is from A Cup Full of Spoons, which is a health and wellness website and a writer who shares informative and relatable content and their own lived experience with chronic illness and disability, neurodivergence and mental health. I also share special interest content and my poetry and art from an AUDHD spoonie. My pronouns are she, her. And what she shared is the following. It's a presentation, but the information is also in the post itself. And what it's called is Lessons I've Learnt as a Midlife Late Diagnosed AUDHD Spoonie. Firstly, go at your own pace. Comparison and trying to keep up with others will just burn you out faster. Be mindful of who is a friend and who is just an acquaintance, and be aware of how much you share and energy you invest in the latter. Just because a person is family, that does not give them the right to treat you badly. You are allowed to distance yourself from toxic people, even if they are related to you. Not everyone is going to like you, and that's okay. You are not for everyone. Don't waste precious time and energy trying to convince ignorant people of your worth. No matter how eloquently and gently you speak, some people are so closed off and entrenched in their beliefs that no amount of sense or wisdom is going to get through to them. And finally, if something brings you joy, do more of that. And what they also say is a disclaimer that I am not a medical professional or psychologist, and this is not medical or psychological advice. What's people's thoughts on what's been shared?
I would maybe go a wee bit easy on the last statement. If something brings you joy, do more of that. I mean, I'm a great believer in that, but of course we have to watch what toes we may be stepping on in our pursuit of our joy.
I think it may be in relation to a hobby you may have, and people find that hobby that you have strange. So family and friends saying, maybe you're a wee bit old for that sort of thing, like, collecting toys or collecting, not even collecting, but doing something that people think is immature. Just playing games, having fun, doing things that you shouldn't be, people feel you shouldn't be doing, even though it brings you joy, within yourself. Obviously, there's limits because people think things like addiction and things like that. Although if that gives people joy is another topic altogether. But I think if you're not hurting anyone and you're just doing something to bring yourself joy in life, which can be quite intense, can be quite traumatizing, it can be a lot of negative things. If something positive can be brought from you doing something, it shouldn't be discouraged by anyone.
Yeah, a sort of initial reaction is to think, what's it got to do with them? Those who judge your hobbies and interests. But at core here, I think this is all speaking around something central, which is like relationship and maybe even dependency. There's a line there, what is it? Not everyone is going to like you, and that's okay. So, yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn sometimes, but we have to learn that one, I think, because sometimes we have expectations. Maybe they're conditioned into us to expect to be liked all the time, or expect it all to be about us, and for these relationships to take care of themselves. But really, it's a mutual arrangement most of the time, relationship. So I just think that's kind of maybe a core thing running through these insights this person has had in this post.
It's something I can relate to, and I was quite inspired by it, just by sharing it. It's like sometimes you go through life and you feel, I think Robbie says this quite a lot, it's like you're being taught or being encouraged or even you're being forced to comply, to behave a certain way, to do certain things. And sometimes this is people are so-called friends. And you can get caught in traps that way. And sometimes you end up being, self-judgment, being down on yourself, being angry at yourself because you're not this so-called better person that a so-called friend or family member wants you to be. It's like you're very self-critical and very, I've been there in many parts of my life, so I do get it. It's like, don't be discouraged, but it's like a midlife sort of lesson, and just giving this sort of advice out to people that may be younger, that there will be bumps in the road, but don't put yourself down. And I know it's a hard thing for people to do, but if people are inspired or encouraged, it can only help. And it can always only help, also help other people for how they treat family members or friends who are autistic or AUDHD sort of thing. It's like, it's educating.
It feels to me that we have to audit our relationships every now and again. We have to think about the people around us and what the shape of those relationships are and what it's worth to us and what compromises we are making. Because we have to value our own situation. So ignoring that somebody doesn't make you feel good when you're around them, and putting up with it might over time reduce your ability to have a healthy relationship somewhere else, because you will become trained to be that kind of friend, the one that they need, and it might be that they are taking advantage. So I think auditing your friend and your family, and then the next stage perhaps even approaching those people, or one at a time, broaching subjects where you don't feel comfortable, rather than waiting until everything builds up so you have a complete bust up, is where it's at for me.
Yeah, what you said there, Jules, reminds me of that phrase that you hear often in your life. It's like, well, why didn't you say something? You know, because we learn to tolerate situations, and just over the decades it's just habituated, and we put up with things. And then the crisis happens, or the bust up, as you put it, and the receiving end of it says, why didn't you say something?
The next post is from Autism Together, which is a charity organisation and is one of the leading providers of autism services and support in the UK. And what they shared was, it says, August saw the last of our late night discos as the summer season comes to a close. It was a particular warm day, so staff and people we support who attended were very pleased there was also an access to a cool room with air conditioning, which helped everyone stay chilled. Big thanks, as always, to Julie and Alison for organising and hosting such a fantastic evening for the people we support. And they also shared a number of photographs of this event of many people enjoying themselves. So I just thought it was good to share. What are people's thoughts?
Just looking at the pictures, just this one here, this looks brilliant. I think we might be evolving new cultures.
Yeah, I like things like this. Looking from the outside, things are organised, social events, which I'm hoping is they're doing it sort of, in partnership with the service, with the people that use the service, so that it's getting done as more as accommodating as possible. Because as we know, autism can be quite intense with sensitivities in terms of sound, sights, heat, to the surrounding in terms of how much space you have and how quite intense it can be if there's too many people. So it's good that these things are organised like social events. It's like somewhere for people to go and feel accommodated, because the so-called kind of normal things like discos and things that are created or are set up don't seem, or certainly in my experience, don't have that accommodation. Not out of badness, just because they're just not thinking that thoroughly about people that may not like certain things that's happening, or just a general environment. It's just I just like these sort of support services that are out there, as long as it's done properly.
I think in the community, often these spaces are there, relatively unused, and maybe sometimes it costs a bit to rent space. But these spaces are there. It's the motivation to use them, that kind of organisation, or even lack of organisation, just turn up and do it, sort of thing. Punk. But of course, there are rules, so be good on them.
The next post is from Reach Every Voice, which is a disability service, and is a practice of educators working with non-speaking and minimally speaking autistic students. We teach these students to express themselves with alternative communication. We also collaborate with families and schools. And they shared a presentation about the role of a communication partner supporting an alternative communication user. And what it says is the role of a communication partner supporting an AAC user looks different from other traditional school jobs or caregiving positions, especially once that role is framed within the context of ensuring the communication rights of non-speaking students are being upheld and respected. Today, our student Nick shares with us ways he envisions ethical support of AAC users by the communication and conversation partners. So the presentation is called Nick's Tips. Advice from a non-speaking autistic guy. And it's called 5 different ways to be an ethical partner to AAC users. Number 1, ask before you share what I spell with you. You don't want every text you write shared on social media, do you? Then don't share a transcript of our conversations. Number 2, prepare for things I tell you to differ from what I tell others. Would you say the same thing to your mum that you would say to your bestie? We all have inconsistencies in the stories we tell. Number 3, grow the habit of not guessing the things I'm typing. My device already tries to predict my words. Don't do it too. It's just annoying. Number 4, stop peeking at my device as I'm typing. I might be sharing something private. And number 5, know that pressure to communicate with you is counterproductive. If you stress me out with your urgency to make it happen, it probably won't happen. Most people's thoughts.
Wow, I think this is so helpful. Obviously, no, there's nothing obvious. Strike that. We shouldn't say anything's obvious, should we? It might feel that some of these things are obvious, but actually doing them requires thought beforehand. And I think it's really helpful to have this person spell it out. And personally, I think those 5 pieces could almost be used with slight alteration for people who use their voices or use their voices partially. It feels as though these 5 pieces are things that all human beings should know, really.
And on top of that, I think this person understands that really well because they're living in a world where things are communicated in certain ways. And so he's speaking our language, or normative language, structure, in order for us, the normative, structured people, communicatively, that we can understand how they're feeling. This is dredging up stuff for me because I had a period where I was caring for someone with motor neuron disease, and it's like getting your diagnosis as well. there was a time when you didn't know what was going on and couldn't understand. And now, thank God, we sort of can slightly. And so it gives us a better understanding of situations that previously would have been extremely difficult.
What I like about these sort of posts, and this particular post, what I like about this post is illustrating the point that there is alternative communication, and that alternative communication should be respected the same way as it should be or would be when you're speaking. There's assumptions made, there's people with good intentions thinking they're doing the right thing, but they forget to ask permission, or they make the assumptions and they make the wrong decisions, and they could, be very hurtful and very damaging. So this post, the tips that Nick is giving it's education, and it's some things that you need to look at more than once. You need to learn, read it over and over, and learn again to understand what it's meaning and the importance of what it means. The information is so crucial, and it's just good that these sort of things can be shared, especially from the people who experience and who live by the alternative communication method for whatever reason.
Yeah. There's something in this, and I'm trying to collect my thoughts together about this, because if you're speaking instead of typing, and somebody appears to be predicting your own words face to face, you don't feel listened to. And there's something about the assumptions. There's something about giving us time to communicate. If you're not allowing somebody who speaks maybe more slowly or types instead of speaking to fully organise their own communication without the patience required, you're not communicating yourself. You're not listening to them, and what you're going to then communicate might not apply to what has been expressed to you. It feels to me as though right across the board, people are peeking into my brain with their own prejudices as I'm typing my spoken words. And that prediction itself might stop me communicating altogether.
The next post is from Neurodivergent Lou, who's a blogger finding a place in a neurotypical world. And Neurodivergent Lou shares presentations on particular topics. And this presentation is about autistic and rely on texting. Why can communicating via text be helpful for autistic people? Texting can give more processing time. Autistic people may have slower processing speeds. Communicating via text reduces the sensory input in comparison to face-to-face communication. For example, the noise of other people walking around while talking or smells in the environment. Texting does not rely on interpreting facial expressions or body language. Autistic people may be able to unmask more while texting in comparison to face-to-face communication. For example, being able to stim more easily and not need to make eye contact. Emojis can be used to convey the intended meaning over text. Autistic people may struggle to pick up on the tone of what someone is saying. You can look back at messages more easily to help with working memory. Autistic people often struggle with working memory. Texting allows you to look back at those messages. Less reliance on turn taking whilst texting. On the text, there may be less sense of turn taking in comparison to face-to-face or on the phone conversation. There is less of concern about interrupting the other person. Texting relies less on auditory processing. Autistic people may struggle with processing information that we hear. The text information may be more easy to process. Texting relies on executive functioning skills. Executive functioning, which skills such as memory, task initiation, flexibility, etc., can be difficult for autistic people. We may, for example, due to this, struggle to actually reply to messages. I'll start this again. Why can communicating via text be difficult for autistic people? Texting relies on executive functioning skills. Executive functioning, which skills as memory, task initiation, flexibility, etc., can be difficult for autistic people. We may, for example, due to this, struggle to actually reply to messages. There is less body language to be able to interpret. Although not having body language to interpret can make it easy for autistic people, it can make it harder too, as we may learn to rely on body language. Visual clues may be easier to process. The sudden ping from a phone can be overwhelming sensory-wise. It can be unexpected too, making it more difficult, especially if it interrupts what we are doing. So it gives you kind of both sides of the argument there. What's people's thoughts on this presentation?
I think one of the things that I've learnt here in our broadcast is how useful texting is. Sometimes I open the microphone and it's difficult to be succinct with what you're thinking about. Whereas if instead I keep the microphone closed and I use the private text to express myself, I might be able to put it in a more pithy way that people get.
Yeah, I get that. Text is so strange because I can see both sides what the presentation's talking about. It's like, for instance, if I need to make a phone call to talk about something, not so, something that's informative, it's like basically passing on information. Texting seems to be the best way forward so that you can just put the information that you want to share. Rather than when you're speaking, it's like you're telling a story. to get round or processing information. Because when you're talking, even face to face, it's like, well, I certainly do. It's like I like to tell a story or try to make a big point of why this information's being shared. But if it's on text, it kind of not forces me, but it makes me think differently. And I just put the information that's required. And if there is any questions, there'll be a text asking a question regarding information shared. But sometimes texting is also a frustration. The kind of sudden ping or any noise you get from that does sort of startle me. Sometimes people want a conversation by text. I'd rather speak to them, on the phone or whatever. Especially with someone close, it's like they're starting a conversation and it's like, how are you? And then you've got to kind of type the answer rather than the feeling naturally to talk and it just seems a bit more of an effort. So I can see both sides in terms of the positive side and the negative sides of texting and talking.
The real difficulty comes, though, where we're looking for equality in spaces. And if you depend on the text that's available, I seem to experience often that generally when there's a mixture of text and a mixture of voice, two conversations start and there isn't enough crossover. It becomes a kind of apartheid of communication. I really look forward to more spaces where things are more equal between people who feel texting will work for them and their voice won't work for them. It's this crossover that really needs to be. I've realised now that when they're talking about texting, they're talking about mobile phones and just sending people little messages on SMS. I really don't use that. I have my phone entirely on silent with no notifications, even though I run a business. And I only allow communication to me when I look for the communication. People even have to leave phone messages for me most of the time rather than have the phone answered.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think it's the texting is talking about mobile, but it also relates to online stuff, like our broadcasts, for instance. And even though we welcome text and we want text because we want people to communicate in their own way as much as possible, because we don't want people forced to feel the need to speak. But sometimes I felt because talking seems to happen quicker, sometimes the text is sometimes missed. And it's kind of learning to include the text conversation within the speaking one. It's like, as you've said, it's like it's trying to the crossover's difficult, but you can learn to put it all together. It's just how we do it and how to learn that kind of craft, so to speak, if that's the term. So I'm definitely, interested in the texting because of my experience of appreciating it and then sometimes finding it a burden.
If we're just down to talking about text, an email is text, isn't it? And I spend sometimes quite a lot of time organising my thoughts into an email and wondering how this is going to be received at the other end, and then go over it again. And I take all this time over it, and then I suddenly realise it's not going to be read, or all of that effort, all of that work put into that, because it isn't that immediacy that's expected in most society of just a text here and a text there and a few words here and a few words there. So there is definitely a hierarchy in communication that puts text down that needs to be addressed.
I think text is what you were saying earlier about auditing. You can delete text before you send it, whereas when you say something, you can't necessarily delete that.
Yeah, the thing about if you say you feel you've said something by mistake, if you're autistic, or certainly if you're me, it's like you're spending half the conversation apologising afterwards. So certainly, I can certainly kind of respond with that. And what Jules talked about email, throughout, the kind of work that I do, I send a lot of kind of formal emails, talking about the difficulties of things like a service isn't good enough or a removal of service isn't good enough. It's like, and then typing it in a way which is reserved and sat back and, polite, as polite as it can be, even though I'm absolutely angry inside. A service has been withdrawn without, in my head, good reason, and I'm sending an email to illustrate that point. But I don't want to come across as angry, because I want it to be progressive, because you can go out and you can say this is absolutely ridiculous and go on this sort of kind of rant. And you can rant in emails as well, but you can read it over and then remove the ranting and then kind of, go over it and create a more reserved and more kind of laid back but direct, information that you want to put across. Because it's very easy to rant, and then if you rant with a certain voice pitch, the person that you're doing it to will become defensive and generally will just switch off anyway. So text that way is definitely, it's definitely got its use.
Yeah. You said the word progressive, and sometimes the word progressive sounds passive-aggressive to me. Progressive, passive-aggressive. You say it fast enough. And I find that people feel that when I craft something, trying not to offend, trying to put over the point, but say it in a non-combative way, passive-aggressive is how it's received.
Yeah, different people will take different bits of information different ways, I suppose. I can see how that can happen. And, Raymond has put the question, probably when it's relating to me, when I was talking about I'm angry, but I'm typing in a more reserved way. Is that still kind of you? Is that you? And yes, it is me. It's just me with the same passion, the same sort of approach. It's just calming myself down so that it comes across better. And it means, and when I do something, generally I look to do something for something to be improved. I don't want to do something and just do it and then waste energy and then nothing comes from it, especially things I've been talking about. So yes, it definitely is me. And I've been told that I'm actually pretty good at it, so I must have learned the craft over a number of years. Because when I generally do these things, I'm doing it not just representing myself, but I'm also representing like a community council or a tenants and residents association, an organisation which is putting these things forward but in a formal way. And then help my own to myself, in my own time. But yes, it's definitely still me, and I feel it's my identity. It's just a different approach.
I'm going to. Oh, sorry, Teresa, go ahead.
When I think about this, I think about processing. So I guess there are some times when you're in the flow of the conversation, it's quite all right to use your voice. And then other times when you're processing at a different speed, maybe more slowly, and then it might be good to text. But then there's a processing issue there too, because if by the time your text arrives, especially if it's in a conversation with more than one person, it might be a bit late. But then that's how my processing works. It's often quite late. I don't know if that makes sense.
It really does. And what I hope you'll find, Teresa, is that we will go back through all the text as we talk, and even if somebody is a little bit behind the curve on what we're discussing here, we will go back to that and pick it up. And if you don't find that, slap us on the wrist and tell us about it, because that's what we're attempting to do. I want to bring in what I think some of our listeners will think here, because I'm play devil's advocate. There's a group of autistic people who might listen to this and say, but what you're doing there is masking. What you're doing is encouraging wearing a mask and then saying to yourself that it's the genuine you. I'll throw that out and see if anybody wants to comment on it.
Well, I suppose. I mean, see, you get into that topic of masking. The masking can mean different things to different people as well. Like sometimes masking can be someone deliberately reserving themselves, not because they don't want to give themselves away or not because they're embarrassed of who they are. It's just they just want to do it because it suits them to do it at that time. But there's others that do it and they feel that they're not getting. It's like they feel that it's like the defense mechanism they feel they need to use, and it's something that they don't like doing, but they do anyway to feel safe.
I would say more than one thing can be true at the same time.
I fully agree with what you say there, Teresa. But I am aware that there's a movement or an attitude out there that doesn't accept that you can be more than one thing at the same time. You can be being context appropriate in a society without losing your own identity. And I think this is a big part of the autism conversation that many of us don't manage to resolve in an appropriate way for ourselves.
The next post is from Autistic Revolution. who are a community organisation, employment, creating neurodivergent affirming spaces, creativity, education, well-being. And what they're sharing is a guest speaker event at Sunday Assembly NE Links. Which is a community centre, which is inclusive, uplifting event with sing-along songs, inspiring and informative speakers and cake. And what it says is, Jenny Loughran, the editor of Autistic Revolution, is inviting the local community into a gentle conversation exploring autistic identity, the neurodiversity paradigm, and our journey so far as a community-building magazine. Thank you to Eve Darwood and Peter Callum for inviting our Jenny to speak at that event. And it's the Sunday Assembly, NE Links, Sunday the 7th of September 2025, 11 AM UK time at the Canopy Community Hub in Grimsby in England, UK. What's people's thoughts? And just to add as well, at that event, there's a poet and spoken word performer, Amanda Crundle, who'll be also performing and speaking at that event.
I'd love to know more about what the paradigm shift is that she's referring to. It's good to see the magazine is still up and going.
It is. It is good to see that it didn't fold. And it's also good to see that they're finding platforms to change the narrative about autism. It would be lovely to have a little bit more association with Autistic Revolution here at Autistic Radio. We had an interview with Jenny a little while back, and it's going to be reposted fairly soon in the next few days. Yeah, it would be interesting to know more about how other groups could align themselves with Autistic Revolution or the Autistic Revolution, whilst also retaining their own identities.
The next post is from Diversity Doodles, which is a personal blog. Doodles that, with your help, aim to spread messages about your diversity that I'd like the world to understand. Thank you for help making it happen. And what they've shared is about self-diagnosis. If you're a neurotypical annoyed at the trend of self-diagnosis, alarmed at the skyrocketing rates of neurodivergence that you refuse to believe them unless they can produce a bit of paper, then I can only ask how you know. How do you know you're annoyed? Has a psychiatrist confirmed this? Are you definitely alarmed? Have you worked out that with a therapist? Can I see confirmation of this definitely being how you're allowed to identify your own brain working through a professionally certified second opinion, please? And a stamped paper of you definite neurotypicalness. I cannot simply take your word for it. Sorry. And if you are neurodivergent, with your professional diagnosis and upset at the idea of self-diagnosis being valid, I will happily posit an alternative. If all those who are self-diagnosed identity with the same traits, presentations, struggles and strengths as you do, then they can loudly dismiss you as being neurotypical, can they not? After all, they are just like you, and yet must be neurotypical, right? You still upset? More upset at being dismissed? Thought so. What's people's thoughts on this?
I feel there's something a bit combative about this post. I'm just trying to get my head around it.
Well, it certainly is. I think it's just, and I can only guess here because I'm not self-diagnosed, is that people who are self-diagnosed are fed up having to justify themselves and why they believe they are neurodivergent, why they believe this and what. It's like people are basically saying they're not real because they haven't got a bit of paper by a psychiatrist or a medical professional basically stating they're part of the club, so to speak. So it's a comparative defensive, well, not defensive, outright attacking back at that sort of criticism that goes to people who are self-diagnosed. And I can totally understand that.
I also think that having a piece of paper doesn't really mean much either, does it?
Well, it did at the time, but then I was only 17 and it did feel, it felt like a breakthrough. But in the main, as life went on, not really. And I certainly don't like this hierarchy. It's like if you're being diagnosed by a medical professional and others haven't, it's like you're above them in some way. You've got more right to be autistic or neurodivergent than them. I just don't like that. It's this hierarchy that always seems to happen. Someone has to feel better than the other. And I just find that really damaging.
I also wonder if I have an analogy, but first I'd like to say this. Isn't it neurotypicals who are in charge of diagnosing? And then what I would like to say is there are some analogies about self-identifying that the United Nations has started to recognize, and these are groups of people who may have been I know this is really going out on a limb, but groups of people who, let's say Indigenous people, who have been sort of erased and trying to get their society back, are now allowed by the United Nations to self-identify because the people in charge of erasing them were not them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it almost means self-identification is true liberation.
I notice that you both have decided to use self-identification as an alternative to self-diagnosis. We need to get away from this need for diagnosis. There was a specific advantage to my diagnosis, even though it was a diagnosis with a psychiatrist and psychologist that some people would not actually accept as a diagnosis, because it was such a very simple, conversation-based letter to another doctor. It wasn't this whole commercial operation where people made a lot of money with appointment after appointment. It was just something very simple, public health service, and a diagnosis that said that that person agreed with my opinion. And that has had value to me. But it's only had value to me talking with professionals through my need to go out and advocate, and my need to use autistic radio to interfere in the system. Amongst autistic people, it has been absolutely irrelevant.
Yeah, just thinking back to the so-called normal at the time diagnosis journey that I had. And it was the late 90s, it was 1998. And it came through a crisis, basically, a health crisis. I was going through a hard time, and I just felt, there was, being a teenager at the time, I was 17, it just seemed a lot of things came to me at once, and it was quite intense. And I felt at the time I was having difficulty at school and all that, and it just all came to a head, and I just felt at the time I need to go into a medical facility to get an answer, because at the time I was seeing a psychiatrist for quite some time, and I was taking antidepressants for quite some time, and I just wanted an answer to see what was going on, because it was just so intense, and it was just really bothering me. And my mum and dad, they were against it, of that, me getting into this facility. They weren't, well, I don't want to say against it. They weren't keen on it, but because of my age, that I had a say on going, you get into this facility, and it was a kind of inpatient ward, and I was in there for a number of weeks, and then I went to a sort of specialist, which was for it was an adolescent unit. And what I recall through that is all these tests, like speaking, which a speech therapist scans on the brain, a lot of talking with a particular psychiatrist for a number of weeks, months, and then it all came to this diagnosis at the end, or which was called at the time Asperger's syndrome. And even though it was explained or what it was at the time, it felt like a relief, but it's like, what the hell is this they're talking about? And basically they're saying it's autism, but it's not autism. It's like you're up the hierarchy of autism, where you can speak and you can do this, you can do that. It's just like you're restricted routine, and you get these strange hobbies, and you find it hard to communicate with people, even though it's not obvious to others. So that's how the diagnosis came into play, and at the time. So it was very medical, very health-based, and, quite intense. And I'd like to think that because people that self-diagnose and self-identify, because I'll try to get away from the diagnosis sort of language, not get away from it, but certainly provide an alternative, because it isn't always suitable. It just depends who you are. It's good. It's different ways of realising or being told of who you are or the condition you have, depending on your outlook.
Yeah, thanks for that, Harry. Back in 1998, there might not have been much of a community around you, and of course, you being, I assume, a teenager, not much points of reference after your diagnosis, but also to even consider what it all meant, which you got on with later with your activism. I think if I reflect back, see, I'm thinking about this because there's maybe a process of elimination after crisis, because my cousin went through this, and it's like there's all these other diagnoses that you can be given, some more serious than, say, a diagnosis of Asperger's or autism. But if I reflect back on my youth, if you were going to say I was self-identifying, there was a term we used called freak, and it was like just an acceptance that you were weird. And there was a kind of countercultural community that accepted that, and so you fell into that crowd, you know. So you were a freak, kind of like a hippie, but a bit more radical. And so that, I see that as a form of self-identification to a certain extent, largely unacceptable to society, although you could coexist happily. So it's just a few reflections on what you were saying there, because you were making me think of what my cousin went through with his initial diagnoses, which were not very helpful for him in the long run.
Yeah, I think I put it in the text. There's an alternative need that was expressed by Harry and an alternative need expressed by Ray about his cousin, and that is undoing previous diagnoses. Lucy has gone into this at length as well, about all the different things that she as a woman was diagnosed with, when the reality was, in later life, she's now been diagnosed and identified as autistic, and that's undone a lot of these previous poor diagnoses. We've spoken to women who have been misdiagnosed with BPD and depression, chronic anxiety, and being given all kinds of pharmaceutical responses. There's persistent defiance disorder, I think there's one thing. There's so many things that people get diagnosed with that are damaging and inappropriate. So maybe for some people, diagnosis is actually necessary to get out of a previous diagnosis.
Yeah,
I agree with that, because it took 60 years for me, and I did have other diagnoses that were wrong. And at the same time, this self-identification thing could work in that same context. They're both, what I mean is, what if somebody was just like Lucy or just like me, doesn't get a diagnosis, then they're trapped in this place, but they're quite sure.
what, you want me to say that, Jules? That I put in the text there?
I really do, yeah.
Well, I put it in text because I was kind of self-editing. When you were going through the labels that women are often given for mental health issues, perhaps behavioural issues, let's say, it made me think about other historical labels. Well, obviously hysteria was one that came up in psychoanalysis, when that was the new language, the new paradigm of understanding. But prior to that, there was witchcraft as well. There was this inability to tolerate certain individuals and their belief systems, say, or thought processes or behaviours in the community. On the positive side, they were called cunning, but they were impractical. But because they defied authority, perhaps, or they were easy victims.
Another thing I thought of in relation to this is in certain communities or families, they would say things like, I don't know exactly how to put it into a phrase, but something like, um, not intelligence, something more than that is right on the fence with insanity. So like genius and insanity. But when you look back over history, so many of those geniuses now would have been said to be autistic. And I know in my family that was true. It was you wanted to be careful about being a genius because you might very well just be insane. Those people probably in our family were autistic.
Or eccentric.
Nonconformist.
Well, it does kind of go back to language, doesn't it? It's like how to understand yourself, because the language that is given to you when you are who you are at times is, I heard a lot of phrases like, oh, don't get above yourself. Who do you think you are? A lot of these limiting kind of phrases which demand that you conform, or what was Robbie's word? Comply.
If we go to the post and the obvious anger in the post, there's a whole sense I have about parts of the autistic community that feel that over a long period of time, through discrimination and poor treatment, that they do have an axe to grind. And they do want to push back. Unfortunately, in general situations, the pushing back actually does more harm than good. It's really difficult.
That's a strange concept that came up in something I was reading this morning about anarchism, and it's what they call heteronormativity, which is whatever you fight against, you begin to replicate, because you used what you were fighting against in order to justify yourself. So you're caught in a trap.
Yeah, you start acting like the bully to push back against the bully.
Yeah, learn to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, people certainly, when they're defensive, sometimes go out attack, and sometimes end up, don't I say overdoing it, but it's like what they're doing is they're rebullying to justify, fighting back against the bully. There's certain, and they end up lashing out to other people that aren't doing the bullying, because they say, look, listen, I went through a lot. You don't know what I went through. Don't you dare try to, say it to me or give me advice. They lash out. You can understand why that happens, but a lot of people, particularly autistic people that do that, end up looked upon as bullies themselves, and it's quite sad. But you can see why it can happen so easy, because people do become angry, and you can understand that. But it's all about moving forward and making progressive steps, and a lot of the time it doesn't do that. It just puts you back into your shell, and there's no easy answers to it. But you can understand why it happens, and you can understand why it can cause so much issues in the community.
What was it Teresa said earlier? Something can mean two things at the same time. You know, that's the core, I think. That's like, we've got to coexist.
But
I
here's
think it was
the
two things can be true at the same time, even within ourselves. But between people, within people, just it's hard for us to stop thinking in black and white. Not us, the world. So I think I meant it that way. If you stop for a minute and say, these two seemingly opposing things can be true at once, it's helpful.
Yeah, the term cognitive dissonance is always used as a negative, that two things can actually be conflicting and true at the same time, and we need to accept that. What I wonder, with the autistic tropes out there, isn't it that autistic people are supposed to be the people with rigid, fixed ideas, and we find it difficult to have two versions of reality happening at the same time? Because my own personal experience of autistic people is that they are very, very willing to have different versions of a narrative or a reality happening at the same time, and they're open to that. But it feels as though we are being told the opposite of that nature, that how that feels to me.
I think the clue's in the word divergent, isn't it? That there's the variant factor. You know, I've always identified with that, and I don't buy into this thinking that's out there that says that, oh, you've become, you're controlled by routines, or you're dependent on routines. You know, a lot of that is PTSD to a certain extent, in order to, you know, anchor yourself in a strange reality at times. So no, I think part of the liberative thinking is to, oh, it's horrible, I don't like using these words, but like transcend the binary, you know, and just have these things coexist.
The next
Also,
post. Oh, sorry, on you go.
Mm.
When you go,
it was
Teresa,
just
sorry.
a tail end thought was in the below the image. It says, "Have you worked this out with your therapist?" The people who do get the diagnosis, in my experience, don't get a therapist. So the only way you could have a therapist is for the women if we went back to our old diagnosis.
I think that's true, Teresa. But here's the rub for me. I don't want a therapist. I want them to fuck off and leave me alone, so that I can talk to other autistic people who really understand what they're talking about.
Oh, me too.
Do you want to say fuck off, therapists?
Yeah.
Sorry for leaving you there.
We could point out what it says when you put a pause between the first three letters of therapist and the rest.
The next post is sharing an old podcast that was done, one of our first ones that Autistic Radio has done. And it kind of leads on from the previous conversations we've had, because it was called Explain Me Autism, episode 1, and the definition of autism, and who defines what autism is. And the group openly discussed autism and autistic identity and the discomfort with the choices presented by others. And this was done in December 2022. So, and it's this is one of our kind of earlier podcasts, so the podcast is actually quite lengthy. And listen to a bit of it, and it's just going through just what we've just been discussing is the autism, the feeling what artistic identity is, and how people try to identify you for whatever reason that they may have, whether they be family members or friends, and not just it's what the effects of having that identity or disclosing having autism, so to speak, and the effects in life as well. What's people's thoughts?
So you did this one just before the new year of 2023.
Yes, it was part of what Autistic Radio does regularly, is the gap in between Christmas and New Year, and it's like a series of broadcasts that we do, some live, some recorded, and which is put on live, so that people don't feel alone and people can get involved with. And that was our very first one, was doing a podcast on that particular topic, because it was a burning topic at the time, and to be honest, still is. And it was the first episode of Explain Me Autism, and there's been many Explain Me Autisms since then.
It's almost exactly a year before I got my diagnosis.
Yeah, I I haven't listened to this for a very, very long time, and I'm not sure how this stacks up since we've been talking about this. The concern I have in my head is that I have opened my being that I no longer believe in it. And I think that comes for lots of the things that we've done in the past, because we've all been working our way gradually to different ideas, and all of that working out, all of those showing our workings in a maths problem is out there for other people to listen to. Maybe that's useful, maybe that's not.
You broke up a bit when you were spoken there for me, Jules. What is it you don't believe in?
No, I don't know. That's the problem, mate. I don't know if I listened to that again, whether I would have said things that I no longer believe, or that the working towards a version of autism for me was part of making these podcasts and part of the process. So, does it stand the test of time? I don't know.
I would say it's part of the process, so it's kind of like keeping a journal. You can, if you look back, I mean, I find it impossible to look back now in journals, but if you look back in them, you can see the progression, there's that word again, of things. And it's good to be fair to yourself and say, that was me then.
And you may not have gotten to the beliefs you have now without having expressed them just that way. And I think I've noticed with podcasts, they sometimes do have a little interstitial at the beginning of old podcasts. And perhaps you could have one that says, beliefs expressed in this podcast may no longer be the same, or we may have built on them.
Bears no resemblance to anyone in reality.
That's a new word for me. Interstitial.
From the interstices.
Interstitial.
Okay, so what exactly does it mean without me Googling? Can I use you as Google?
Maybe Raymond knows. Just a sec.
I was going to give it over to you. Interstices are like the joining factors between things, aren't they? It's like the cracks that things can slip through. That's the way I look at it poetically. But interstitial means the areas where things join and merge. But I think Teresa was using it as
they're like
can,
lattices in. So in science, I think it's what holds everything together, like hold your cells together or something.
oh yeah, don't go down that rabbit hole of the cellular substance they discovered that keeps our bodies together.
But I think it also maybe in physics or in this conversation goes to what we were talking about before, that not everything is binary. It's not just one or the other. So this at the time was true, and it also holds together what is true now.
When I shared the old podcasts, I don't generally listen to them because I've listened to them already, although it's a few years ago. But what I do find, beneficial is even without listening to them, and even if I was listening to myself saying certain things at the time, which might be a bit cringeworthy or feeling it might not be accurate today, it was accurate at the time, and it's part of our journey. And we always promote our podcasts as being, it's not intended to hurt anybody, certainly not, but it's intended to be authentic. It's intended to people having their say about their experiences and talking about views. And it can only be a good thing. And I like sharing those because I like sharing the work that's been done in the past. I think the only thing it goes against with, there's only about 2 or 3 of these podcasts. The only thing it goes against is maybe its length. Because when we do podcasts now, they're put down to maybe an hour at the most, but generally between 30 to 50 minutes. But at that time, we were just new, early in the game, and we were just experimenting. And we're still learning, experimenting up to this minute. But we talk about so many interesting topics, like the Explain Me Autism, the definition of autism. I mean, things said at the time, could be, crucial now. And there was many that were involved in these podcasts that are no longer involved. So it's like a different voices from people that have been part of Autistic Radio. So it is beneficial in some way.
What was it, Harry, that made you pick this one out? Anything in particular, or just an example?
What I was doing is just, I like to repost. Jules reposts many that are still quite recent, like for the past year, about different topics. And what I was thinking, what I would do is just go back to the beginning. There's a list of the podcasts that have been created, and I like to pick out the ones that are specifically on a particular topic, rather than the podcast that this is going through a number of topics. There's ones that we've done particular topics on, and we still do, and I just find it beneficial. Because there's other ones, in the pipeline. We've done things on loneliness. We've done topics on autism and driving, autism and sleep. And there's other ones where we've done it with other people as well. Some that I may share. It's just because there's always new people coming on to the Autistic Radio page. So it's good to show off our work and what we've done in the past, and an opportunity for new people to see those posts, to hear those podcasts. So I'll be looking to do this on a regular basis. But I don't want to overload the page of that. I like to kind of keep it, varied as much as possible. But I do enjoy sharing what we've done in the past. It's a good timeline as well, the stuff that we've done. And up to a certain point, and I think this was kind of mentioned some time ago, so it's a lot more now. We've actually done over 200 podcasts altogether. So we've done very well. And we thank everybody, past and present, who's been involved in these podcasts and the work on the live broadcasts that we're doing right now. So thank you. And this comes to the end of the broadcast. Thanks everyone that's been involved tonight. It was a good conversations and a number of topics. And thanks to the people that share these posts that we've touched on tonight. It just shows you there's so much out there on autism that can be discussed in great length and can be shared as well, that can inspire others and educate others as well. So that's much appreciated. So this is Harry's Facebook for Sunday, the 31st of August, 2025, which is part of the Spectrum Voices conversation, which is on every Sunday, 5:55 PM to 7:30 PM UK time. And I look forward to doing the same next week. So thank you once again, and now I'll hand over to Jules.
Oh, thanks, Harry. Great work. We've been making this recording and it's gone so fast. Somebody in the text has said, wow, look at the time. Now we'll move on to what we do here at Autistic Radio and the charity that we formed ourselves as autistic people, Autistic Association.